In 1190 BC, a letter arrived in Ugarit from Cyprus. It was a warning. The king of Cyprus was writing to the king of Ugarit to tell him that the sea peoples were coming. But there was something strange in the letter, something that archaeologists would argue about for decades. The king of Cyprus didn't just say the enemy is coming. He said, "It was the people from your country and your own ships who did this." Your country, your own ships. For a century, no one understood what that line meant. Then they found the helmet. Look at it. Horned bronze. Distinctive. Unmistakable. A design that appears in Egyptian tomb paintings, in Hittite reliefs, in Mycenaean pottery. Every great civilization of the Bronze Age drew this same helmet. Now look at this. Egypt's most elite warrior unit, the personal bodyguard of Ramesses II, defending the Pharaoh at the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BC. The greatest military power in the known world trusts these men with its king's life. Now look at this, the coalition that almost destroyed Egypt, the Sea Peoples, the invasion that Ramesses III barely survived. 1177 BC, same helmet, same warriors, different side. The question is not who the Sherden were. The question is, what did they know that made them switch sides? To understand what happened in 1177 BC, you need to understand a timeline, not as history, as an intelligence dossier. 3 data points, 98 years apart. They tell a single story. Entry 1, year approximately 1375 BC, the Amarna Letters. Egypt is at the height of its power under Akhenaten, and in the diplomatic correspondence of that era, the Sherden are already there, already serving Egypt, already inside the walls. This is not a new relationship. This is a mature one. Generations of access to Egyptian military intelligence, command structures, fortification layouts, supply routes, the location of grain reserves, the timing of fleet deployments. They didn't arrive as strangers. They arrived as professionals. Entry 2, year approximately 1278 BC, Sherden pirates raid the Egyptian coast. Ramesses II defeats them. What does he do with the prisoners? Execute them? Enslave them? Send them to the quarries? No. He incorporates them into his personal guard. The Tanis II stele records his exact words, "Those whom none could withstand, but he plundered them by the victories of his valiant arm." Translation: he recruited the men who had just attacked him. The Sherden who came to destroy Egypt were now being paid by Egypt. They had access to everything. Entry 3, year 1274 BC, 4 years after the raid, the Battle of Kadesh, the most documented military engagement of the ancient world. Ramesses II rides into an ambush. The Hittite chariot corps breaks his formation. His army scatters. He is, by his own account, nearly killed. The soldiers who save his life, according to the Kadesh reliefs, are Sherden. Horned helmets surrounding the Pharaoh. The men who attacked Egypt are now its last line of defense. At some point in the next 100 years, those same soldiers, or their sons, or the soldiers they trained, crossed the line. And when they did, they didn't attack blindly. They attacked with a century of institutional knowledge. In modern intelligence terms, this is called an insider threat. In 1177 BC, there was no term for it, only the result. One more thing before we go further. The Sherden were not an army. They were not a nation. They were not a unified force with a flag and a general. They were a mercenary class, a professional soldier identity, potentially from multiple places. That distinction matters because it means they didn't defect. Defection requires loyalty. What they did was something older and more dangerous. They followed the money, and when the money changed sides, they were already on the new side because they had been building it for 100 years. But the Sherden didn't just save the life of Ramesses II at Kadesh. They handed him something that would change warfare forever. Look at the sword in the Sherden warrior's hand. It is not Egyptian. It never was. This is a Naue II sword, named after the 19th century German archaeologist Julius Naue, who first cataloged it. The sword itself is far older. It was born in northern Italy, possibly Bohemia, sometime around the 15th century BC, and it spread. In 200 years, it reached Greece, Crete, the Aegean Islands, Cyprus, the Levant, the coast of Egypt. More than 130 specimens have been documented in the territory of the former Yugoslavia, more than 100 in Italy, 38 in the Greek world, including Cyprus. By 1200 BC, exactly in the years before the collapse, the Naue II had arrived everywhere. The design is the point. Every sword before it was either a thrusting weapon or a slashing weapon. The Naue II was both. The blade had a central rib running its entire length, structural reinforcement that made it nearly impossible to break under impact. The hilt was a flat tang with rivets for organic grips. No separate crossguard, no elaborate casting. Simple, robust, lethal. 60 to 70 centimeters of double-edged bronze with a composition of approximately 85 to 90% copper and 9 to 11% tin. A standard alloy, not a better metal, a better geometry. The Getty Foundation's 2022 study on Bronze Age military technology is direct about this. The Sherden are of particular interest as an example of how mercenaries served as a conduit for the introduction of military technologies. The reliefs are clear. The Sherden carry the Naue II. The Egyptian soldiers in the same scenes carry something different. And then, after the recruitment of 1278 BC, something changes in Egyptian armaments. The changes in weapon design visible in Dynasty 19 reliefs are traceable to exactly the period after the first mass recruitment of Sherden mercenaries. Ramesses II did not just capture warriors. He captured the military technology of the next century. And the army that would defend Egypt in 1177 BC, Ramesses III's army, went into battle carrying weapons that had arrived in Egypt in the hands of the men who had come to attack it. That sword traveled across the entire Mediterranean, and it wasn't the only thing moving. Before we go further, we need to destroy a myth. Not a Bronze Age myth, a 19th century one. The term Sea Peoples was invented in 1881 by the French Egyptologist Gaston Maspero. In 1177 BC, nobody called them that. The Egyptians recorded them as separate, distinct groups, each with different helmets, different weapons, different iconography. Maspero took that list and gave it a single dramatic name. And for more than a century, historians have been trying to find the army behind the label. There was no army. There was a label. 5 groups emerged from the evidence: the Sherden, the Peliset, the Luca, the Ekwesh, the Denyen. 5 groups, 5 different helmets, 5 separate evidential trails. After 170 years of academic debate, no consensus exists on where any of these groups actually came from. The best documented military invasion of the ancient world has no confirmed perpetrators. Now there is a competing theory, and it changes everything. The dominant 21st century interpretation proposes something more unsettling than an invasion. The Sea Peoples were not an invading army. They were entire nations in motion, people displaced by the same drought, the same network collapse, and the same famine that was destroying the Bronze Age system. They weren't attacking civilization. They were fleeing the collapse of their own. I'm not going to resolve that claim yet, because in 2019, a laboratory in Germany changed the question entirely. 1175 BC, Ramesses III has just won. He builds the Temple of Medinet Habu at Luxor and covers its walls with the story of his victory over the Sea Peoples. It is one of the most detailed military records in the ancient world. And on those walls, he left us something extraordinary, a primary source, In his own words, "No land could stand before their arms from Hatti, Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Elashia on, being cut off at one time. They were coming forward toward Egypt while the flame was prepared before them. Their confederation was the Peleset, Cheker, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Weshesh. They laid their hands upon the land as far as the circuit of the earth. Their hearts were confident and trusting. Our plans will succeed." Write it again, slowly. "No land could stand before their arms, from Hatti, Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Elashia. These are the Hittite Empire, northern Syria, the greatest Anatolian trading centers, and Cyprus, all gone before they reached Egypt." Ramesses III is not describing the cause of a war. He is describing the collapse of the entire Bronze Age network as the prelude to his own military victory. He is listing the world that ended as the opening act of his triumph. And here is the structural problem. If these groups destroyed the Hittite Empire, the city-states of Ugarit, all of Canaan and Cyprus, why did they stop at Egypt? Why did the most powerful destruction machine in history fail at the border of the one civilization they had spent 100 years studying from the inside? Ramesses claims a decisive victory. The reliefs show piles of enemy dead, rows of prisoners, and the Pharaoh triumphant. But the Peleset, the group Ramesses III claims to have defeated, were settled permanently in Canaan afterward. The defeated sea peoples became the Philistines. A victory that ends with the enemy permanently settled on your border is not a victory. It is a negotiated halt. And now notice something. Read the Medinet Habu inscription one more time. The Confederation, Peleset, Cheker, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Weshesh. The Sherden are not listed. Egypt's own elite guards, the men who served the Pharaoh for 100 years, the men with horned helmets visible in the attacking coalition, are absent from the list of defeated enemies because they were fighting on both sides simultaneously. Ramesses III could not acknowledge that, so he didn't. The walls of Medinet Habu show something that exists nowhere else in the ancient world: a naval battle in real time, both sides simultaneously. This is history's first visual representation of a sea battle, and it is one of the most technically rich documents ever carved in stone because it shows the ships of both fleets at the same moment. Look at the ships of the sea peoples. The prow rises sharply, ending in the carved head of a bird. The stern mirrors it. The hull is deep and narrow, built for open water. There are no oars visible. These ships run on sail, a square sail rigged from a single mast with a system of control ropes, what naval historians call a brailed rig, that allows the sail to be gathered vertically from above. It is a technology that gives the sailor extraordinary autonomy on the open Mediterranean and a fatal vulnerability in enclosed waters. Jeffrey P. Emanuel of Harvard University has done the definitive analysis of this relief. His findings are published in Harvard Dash. What he found is this: in the Medinet Habu naval battle, the Egyptian ships and the Sea People's ships are almost technologically identical. Both have the brailed sail. Both have a crow's nest, a lookout platform at the top of the mast, the first ever depicted in the history of naval illustration. Both have deck platforms where warriors fight. The Egyptian ships of every pharaoh before Ramesses III have none of these features. The conclusion is unavoidable. Egypt copied the ships of the invaders before the invaders arrived. Because Sherden sailors, captured, recruited, and serving in Egypt for nearly a century, had already transferred the technology. And then Ramesses III used that knowledge to build the trap. He did not meet the sea peoples in open water. He drew them into the mouths of the Nile Delta, where the current pushes toward the sea, where the waterways are shallow and narrow, where a deep-hulled sailing ship with no oars cannot maneuver, cannot turn, cannot escape. The inscription says the enemy was capsized and overwhelmed where they are. They were not defeated by superior ships. They were defeated by superior intelligence. Someone had told Ramesses III exactly what those ships could not do. And then, in year 8 of Ramesses III, that knowledge was put to the test. Year 8 of Ramesses III, approximately 1177 BC, the largest naval battle of the ancient world, fought in the mouths of the Nile Delta. The Medinet Habu reliefs show this battle in extraordinary detail. They are the only visual record of a Bronze Age sea battle in existence. Look at the land battle. Ox carts, women and children visible in the relief. This was not a raid. This was not an invasion. This was a migration with an army. They weren't trying to conquer Egypt. They were trying to settle in Egypt. They brought their families. Now look at the water. The Egyptian fleet has oars in the water, active, maneuvering. The Sea People's ships have their sails furled, brailed up, and their hulls locked in position. They cannot turn. The shallow, brackish channels of the delta are exactly the environment where a deep-hulled ocean vessel becomes a floating prison. The archers on the Egyptian riverbanks have clear sight lines. The Sea Peoples have no room to maneuver, no wind to catch, and no depth to sail into. Ramesses III claims he positioned archers on the riverbanks and used the current to trap the enemy fleet. The physical geography of the delta supports exactly this account. But there is one tactical detail the inscription does not explain. The Sea Peoples were experienced sailors. They had destroyed coastal cities from Cyprus to Canaan. They had navigated the eastern Mediterranean under crisis conditions, carrying entire populations across open water. They knew harbors and coastlines. Why didn't they know the delta was a trap? One interpretation. Egypt had veteran Sherden sailors in its service, men who had crossed the Mediterranean on these exact same ships, who knew their turning radius, their draft, their dependence on wind, advising the defense. Look at the helmets in the relief. Both sides, same helmets, both sides. The men who knew the ships best may have been the ones who designed the cage. For 3,000 years, everything we knew about the Sea Peoples came from walls, Egyptian reliefs, destroyed tablets, burned palace archives. In 2019, a laboratory in Leipzig changed the question entirely. Not with stone, with bone. Station 1, Ashkelon. The paper is Feldman et al., published in Science Advances on July 3, 2019, from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. The site, Ashkelon, a Philistine port city on the southern coast of Israel. The sample, 10 individuals across 3 chronological layers, 3 from the Late Bronze Age, before 1200 BC, 4 from the Early Iron Age, the Philistine period, approximately 1200 to 1050 BC, 3 from the Late Iron Age, roughly 1000 to 700 BC, the Bronze Age individuals, genetically local, Levantine, consistent with populations that had lived in that region for millennia. The Early Iron Age individuals, different. A European-related genetic component appears in Ashkelon, a signal absent in all prior layers, at exactly the moment the archaeology places the Philistine arrival. One Early Iron Age female clusters genetically with individuals from Late Bronze Age Greece. Mycenae. One Early Iron Age male carries the Y chromosome haplogroup R, 1b-M269, the most common haplogroup in Bronze Age Europe, rare in the Levant. And then, by the Late Iron Age, the European signal is gone, diluted completely back into the local gene pool within 2 to 3 generations. The Max Planck Institute's official statement, European-derived ancestry was introduced into Ashkelon around the time of the Philistines' estimated arrival, suggesting that the ancestors of the Philistines migrated across the Mediterranean and reached the shores of the southern Levant at the beginning of the Iron Age. The migration was real. The people in Ramesses III's victory inscription, the Peliset, the terrifying foreign invaders he claimed to have defeated, were in significant part genetically identical to the Mycenaeans. The people the same inscriptions say destroyed Mycenae. They were the Bronze Age. Running, Station 2, Tel Tainat. The paper is Scortaniotti et al., published in Cell, May 2020. The site, Tel Tainat, in the Hatay province of southern Turkey, the ancient city of Kunulua, later capital of the Iron Age kingdom of Patina/Unki. Tel Tainat is not a port. It is 25 kilometers inland. The archaeology of the site shows something unexpected. Ceramics of late Helladic 3C style, the final phase of Mycenaean pottery, appear in the bronze-iron transition layers of the 12th century BC. The same style of ceramic that appears at the destruction sites along the Aegean coast appears here, in the interior of Turkey, at the same moment. A note on honesty. The Scortaniotti 2020 paper covers the period up to the late Bronze Age. The genetic data for Tel Tainat at the exact transition of 1200 BC is not yet published. The evidence at this station is currently archaeological, not genomic, but the implication stands. If Mycenaean cultural material reached 25 kilometers inland into Anatolia during the collapse, the migration was not a coastal phenomenon. It was a deep penetration into the interior of the Near East. Station 3, Megiddo. The paper is Agranat Tamir et al., published in Cell, May 28, 2020. 73 individuals, 9 sites. The Bronze and Iron Age Levant. Megiddo, the biblical Armageddon at the mouth of the Jezreel Valley, is part of this study. And the data it reveals is not about the Sea Peoples specifically. It's about the Levant itself. Between 2500 and 1000 BC, populations from the Caucasus and Zagros regions flowed southward into the Levant, repeatedly, detectably. The Bronze Age inhabitants of Megiddo were already a genetic mixture, local Neolithic ancestry combined with earlier migrations from the north and east. The movement of the Sea Peoples was not an anomaly. It was the latest iteration of a pattern 1,500 years old. The Mediterranean was not a barrier, it was a road, and the Sea Peoples were not the first to use it. They were the last, before the road collapsed. Station 4, Cyprus. In April 2024, Scientific Reports published a paleogenomic study of Cyprus, the first systematic ancient DNA analysis of the island. A precise note on what this paper covers. The study focuses primarily on the period before the Bronze Age collapse. There is not yet a published genomic data set for Cyprus that captures specifically the transition of 1200 BC with enough individuals to draw conclusions about migration during the collapse itself. What the archaeology tells us is clear. Enkomi, Cyprus's principal copper export harbor, with direct commercial links to Ugarit, was destroyed and rebuilt in the 12th century BC by new occupants. Hala Sultan Teke, Kition, Pale Epaphos, all show abrupt cultural disruption at the same horizon. Late Helladic 3 ceramics appear at every major coastal site simultaneously. New settlements are founded in elevated defensive positions. Ma Palaya Castro, Pila Kokona Kremos. Architecturally unlike anything in the prior Cypriot record. And at Enkomi, in the layers immediately following the destruction, archaeologists found a bronze statue now known as the Horned God, 55 centimeters tall, crest of 2 curved horns on the helmet, iconographically identical to the Sherden warrior of the Egyptian reliefs. Cyprus is the missing link between the Aegean and the Levant. The genetic data for the transition moment does not yet exist, but the bronze does. Station 5, Sardinia. The paper is Marcus et al., Genetic History from the Middle Neolithic to Present on the Mediterranean Island of Sardinia, published in Nature Communications, February 2020. 70 ancient individuals, 21 archaeological sites, 6,000 years of genetic history. The finding relevant to this episode is this. During the Nuragic period, the 2nd millennium BC, exactly the time of the Sherden, Sardinia shows near-complete genetic continuity with the Neolithic. No signal of a large population entering the island. No signal of a large population leaving it. As Joe Marcus, the paper's co-first author, stated, "We observe a remarkable constancy in ancestry from the Middle Neolithic through the Nuragic period in Sardinia. The genetic changes on Sardinia begin only after the Bronze Age collapse, with the arrival of the Phoenicians around 800 BC, not before." Station 6, the Southern Arc. The paper is Lazaridis et al., published in Science on August 26, 2022. 3 papers in a single issue. 727 ancient individuals. 11,000 years. The full corridor from Iran to the Balkans, from the Caucasus to the Aegean. The conclusion relevant to this episode: the movement of peoples through the Southern Arc was not a crisis event. It was the normal state. The expansion of the Yamnaya steppe culture southward. The flow of Caucasian ancestry into Anatolia and the Levant. The spread of Aegean populations during the Bronze Age. The Mediterranean was always a corridor. The sea peoples did not rupture it. They were the last wave before the infrastructure that enabled all of it. The palaces, the grain routes, the copper trade, the diplomatic networks finally failed. What broke in 1177 was not the movement of people. What broke was everything that made that movement make sense. The Sherden paradox. 727 ancient individuals in the Southern Arc study, 70 in Sardinia, 10 in Ashkelon, dozens from Anatolia, Cyprus, the Levant. From the Peliset, we have DNA. Ashkelon 2019. From the Checker, the Denien, the Shekalesh, the Weshesh, nothing confirmed. From the Sherden, the group most extensively documented in the Egyptian record, the group that served as Pharaoh's personal guard for a century, the group whose helmets appear on both sides of every engagement, the group whose individual names appear in a tax document 35 years after the battle. 0 genomes, not one. After 3,200 years. After a genomic revolution that sequenced 727 individuals from the exact corridor they traveled. The paradox is not just open, it is perfectly, structurally open. We know what happened to the Peliset. We know what happened to the Bronze Age. We know what the Levant looked like genetically before and after. But the Sherden, the group this entire episode is about, remain genetically invisible. That absence is not a failure of science. It is an answer. The most documented group of the Sea Peoples left no recoverable genetic trace, which means either they were too dispersed to cluster, or too thoroughly assimilated to be found, or they came from somewhere the archaeologists haven't looked yet. The paradox remains open. The genetics didn't find the Sherden, but there is another kind of evidence, one you can hold in your hand, and for centuries, archaeologists had only the walls of Medinet Habu to know what a Sherden warrior looked like. The horned helmet, the round shield with its central boss, the long bronze sword, and then, in excavations across Sardinia, something started coming out of the ground. Bronze figurines, 10 centimeters tall, cast using the lost wax method, a technique requiring metalworking skill of the highest order, the same method used by the Phoenicians. More than 500 have been recovered so far, from sacred wells, from giants' tombs, from inside the Nurag towers themselves. Archaeologists call them Bronzetti. They show warriors with horned helmets, with round shields, with long swords. One by one, the iconographic details match the Sherden reliefs from Egypt, not approximately, precisely. Recent finds at Aroli and Balau have pushed the earliest Bronzetti back to around 1300 BC, directly overlapping with the documented Sherden presence in Egypt. The civilization that produced these figurines is one of the most dense megalithic cultures in prehistoric Europe. 7,000 towers, nures, have been identified on Sardinia. Some estimates put the original number as high as 30,000. A standard nurig required the equivalent of 10 men working for 4 to 6 years to construct. At the height of the Sherden's activity in Egypt, Sardinia was blanketed by this infrastructure. The island was not a peripheral backwater, it was a civilization, and it was rich in copper. A 2025 study published in PLOS 1 analyzed 48 Bronzetti using a multi-proxy approach: copper isotopes, tin isotopes, osmium isotopes. The result? The metal came primarily from the Iglesiente Solstice district in southwest Sardinia, with additional copper from the Iberian Peninsula. Long-distance metal trade, integrated into the same Bronze Age commercial network as Ugarit, Cyprus, and Egypt. The copper oxide ingots, the standard currency of Bronze Age trade, circulated from Cyprus through the Levant and into the Western Mediterranean. Nuragic sailors were not isolated. They were part of the system. Now, the debate. There are two opposing academic positions, and neither has won. Position 1. The Sherden originated in Sardinia as Nuragic warriors who emigrated east as mercenaries, raiders, and traders. The name Srdn in Egyptian derives from the ancient name of the island. Position 2. The Sherden were a group of uncertain origin, possibly Aegean, possibly Anatolian, who after the collapse of 1177 BC migrated westward and settled in Sardinia, giving the island its name. The first position says Sardinia exported the Sherden to the Mediterranean. The second says the Mediterranean returned them to Sardinia. And the genetics of Marcus 2020 complicates both. During the Nuragic period, precisely 1200 to 1000 BC, Sardinia shows no detectable large-scale population entry and no detectable large-scale population exit. If the Sherden left in large numbers, they didn't leave a genetic gap. If they arrived in large numbers, they didn't leave a genetic signal. Giacomo Caviglie, the Italian archaeologist who has spent 2 decades running the Sardana project, excavating in Egypt, Sardinia, Sicily, Corsica, and southern Spain, acknowledged this directly in 2018. If tomorrow I found proof that the Sardana were the Nuragic people of Sardinia, I would be overjoyed. Unfortunately, for now, nothing confirms it. That honesty is the most important sentence in this chapter, because it means the Bronzetti are not a solution. They are a question carved in bronze. The genetics didn't find the Sherden, but the bronze did. But there is one more piece. It's not in Sardinia, it's in a museum in Brooklyn. Year 4 of Ramesses V, approximately 1140 BC, 35 years after the Battle of the Nile Delta, a team of Egyptian scribes is moving through the farmland of Middle Egypt, through the Fayoum oasis and along the Nile from what is today Alminya, measuring fields, assessing crops, recording tenants. They are compiling a land cadastre, 102 columns of text, more than 4,500 lines, written in a very cursive hieratic script by multiple hands across 23 days of fieldwork. It is the largest non-funerary papyrus ever recovered from ancient Egypt. In 1893, the American Egyptologist Charles Edwin Wilbour bought it from a farmer near Elephantine. After his death, it passed to his daughter, who donated it to the Brooklyn Museum. Alan Gardner published the first scholarly commentary in 1948. It is called the Wilbour Papyrus, and in the middle of its land assessments, in the lists of tenants and smallholders along the Middle Nile, there are names, Sherden names. 42 Sherden individuals documented as landholders or tenant farmers across 59 plots in the Fayum region in Middle Egypt. Not soldiers, not prisoners, not a military unit. Farmers, with parcels, with assessed yields, with addresses. Giacomo Cavillier's paper published in Syria is direct about what this means. During the 20th dynasty, the Egyptian state introduced a regime of individual land tenure for the Sherden. They were no longer a military corps. They were individual subjects of the Egyptian state with the same rights and obligations as any other smallholder. The academic paper published by the University of Arizona's Journal of Ancient Egyptian Interconnections traces the complete arc, from adversarial raiders to recruited mercenaries to a phase of military service combined with social exclusion, to a final multi-generational period of rapid and permanent acculturation. And then they disappeared. Not violently, administratively. Their grandchildren were not Sherden. They were farmers of Middle Egypt with ancestors who had once crossed the Mediterranean in ships with bird-headed prows. The warrior who came from the sea to destroy Egypt died as an old man in a field beside the Nile. And we have his name in a tax document. The most complete military record of the ancient world ends not with a battle. It ends with a land survey. And while a Sherden plowed his field in the Fayum, 800 kilometers to the north, the Hittite Empire was coming apart. That is another story. 3 events, 3 civilizations, same decade, same mechanism. A network so fragile that when it failed, the people it had created had nowhere to go, except back into it, as its destroyers. We know who attacked Egypt. We know who burned Ugarit. We know who ended Pylos. But there is one civilization that watched all of this from the center and managed to survive, barely. The Hittite Empire didn't fall to the Sea Peoples. It fell to something else, something internal. That story is next. If you don't want to miss it, subscribe. The next episode drops soon. And if this one made you think, leave a comment. Tell me where you think the Sherden came from. The paradox is still open.